Hello YouTube. Let's talk today about the ever-exciting world of espionage, about its totalitarian variety, and I hope you learn some interesting things. The specifics of the two Soviet state security agencies responsible for the country's security, the KGB and the GRU, are often confused. They initially had a different focus, although the areas of their activities sometimes intersected. The area of responsibility of the KGB was mainly inside the country. These are counterintelligence and the suppression of anti-Soviet activities, the fight against dissent and nationalism, delivery of safe government communications, and the protection of the Communist Party bosses. This is what the KGB had on its agenda. The GRU, unlike the KGB, was not engaged in ideological work. The agency was responsible for foreign intelligence, but the main difference between the two power structures was their subordination. If the KGB was under the direct control of the country's leadership, then the GRU was under the control of the Ministry of Defense. The KGB is an extension of the Communist Party, and GRU is an extension of the army. The KGB was guided by the principles of patriotism in the service of communism, and the GRU by the opposite principle, communism in the service of patriotism. However, between the KGB and the GRU was a common field of activity. It was the special operations outside the USSR, which was carried out either in the security framework of Soviet citizens abroad or to counter hostile political regimes. They could operate independently of each other or in tandem. The range of professional interest of the KGB was quite wide. Hence the complex structure of the department, which was divided into various different departments. So the agency divided into various departments. For example, the A department was responsible for analytics. The P department was in charge of protecting the interests of the defense capability and economic development of the USSR. And the T department ensured transport security. A special structure of the KGB was the so-called Third Directorate, or military counterintelligence. Here, the KGB's area of activity extended beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. In particular, the agency coordinated its work with the military districts stationed on the territory of the Warsaw Pact member states. Inside the country, counterintelligence interacted with the troops of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, performing joint operations to counter organized crime and terrorist activities. The GRU is a largely closed organization, and even after the collapse of the USSR, not much information is available to the public. Former GRU employees prefer not to expose the nuances of their activities to the public. After all, they worked in many places on our planet and could be dressed in the military uniform of any army in the world. In the sphere of interest of the GRU were virtually all available types of intelligence: military, operational, radio engineering, photographic, biological, radio engineering, electronic, and space. The last three were part of the 6th Directorate of the GRU, which had its own centers, both in the USSR and abroad. I told you about the most secretive GRU intelligence branch, the space intelligence, and its connection to the formidable Russian space forces. And pertaining to the so-called UFO research in the former USSR and modern Russia. Now, all my information comes from open sources, just to make sure you understand my knowledge. I'm a researcher, that's it. The birth of the GRU Special Forces, or Army Special Forces, is associated with the emergence of mobile means of nuclear attack and the creation of the North Atlantic Alliance in the late 1940s. It was then that the need arose to disable enemy military facilities that pose an immediate threat to the security of the USSR. The Army Special Forces were responsible for a wide range of actions, from conducting reconnaissance in the enemy's rear and capturing persons important in terms of information to acts of sabotage and the destruction of NATO tactical nuclear weapons. In May of 1968, at the height of the Vietnam War, the first operation of the GRU Special Forces took place. Allegedly, then a mobile group of 10 saboteurs attacked a U.S. military facility in Cambodia. The operation lasted only 25 minutes. During this time, Soviet Special Forces managed to hijack an American attack helicopter Cobra, destroying the rest of the enemy's air assets. In 1981, the state security agencies, in the mode of extreme secrecy, formed a special squad whose task included protecting the interests of the USSR both inside the country and abroad. It received the name Wimpel, or Pennant in English. Initially, only KGB officers were selected to serve there. Later, the detachment was replenished by the military. Its specifics are tracking down terrorists, seizing buildings, freezing hostages, and eliminating individuals who pose a threat to national security. According to experts, the training of one fighter of the Wimpel cost the treasury 250,000 rubles. The selection process was extremely rigorous, but it was conducted on a voluntary basis. The trained Special Forces soldier was fluent in 2 foreign languages and the basic of operational work, had excellent mountaineering, airborne, and army training. Among the successful operations of Wimpel are the release of the members of the Soviet embassy in Beirut, taken hostage by the terrorists, as well as the storming of the Amin Palace in Kabul. The last operation is an example of the joint action of the special forces of the KGB and GRU, Alpha, and the 154th Separate Forces Unit, created on the basis of the so-called Muslim battalions. As a result of the storming of the Taj-Bek Palace, Amin, who seized power in Afghanistan, was eliminated. The Soviet Special Forces lost 7 people killed and 36 wounded, considering that the enemy forces outnumbered them 4-fold. On the night after the assault, under the protection of KGB officers, a new Afghan leader, Babrak Karmal, took the place as the head of the republic. Now, let's talk about something else in the Soviet intelligence and counterintelligence. Your weapons are your bodies, and how the KGB trained female agents. The future employee of the Special Forces always had special requirements. She needed to understand the subtleties of psychology, be able to control herself, and know languages. But most importantly, she must be attractive, relaxed, and ready to seduce men. The Soviet undercover intelligence officer Galina Fedorova noted that a woman is sensitive, fragile, easily vulnerable, stronger than a man, attached to the family home, more prone to nostalgia. But these small weaknesses, as she said, according to Fedorova, give a woman more powerful leverage in the field of human relationships. Many secret services of the world willingly resorted to the services of females. So in the United Kingdom, according to the Russians, more than 40% of the MI6 intelligence and MI5 counterintelligence officers are women. Elegant agents, that's how they call it, for decades justified the trust of the British Crown. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union also actively recruited women to serve in foreign intelligence. Galina Fedorova also played an important role in obtaining secret documents from the Pentagon and NATO. In 1989, the chairman of the KGB, Vladimir Khrushchev, in an interview, pointed out that 14% of all military and civilian personnel in the KGB are women. Now, this is the perestroika times, so information, thanks Gorbachev and his policies, were coming out. The female cadres of the KGB had high demands, especially in terms of endurance and psychological endurance, since women who worked undercover had to live far from their homeland for a long time. Versatile talents, erudition, and intelligence were pluses when entering the state security, or in plain language, espionage agencies. So among the KGB agents who worked abroad were Yelena Zarubina, Doctor of Philosophy, and Zoya Rybkina, known in the USSR as the children's writer Zoya Voskresenskaya, winner of the Soviet State Prize. Females in the State Security Agency of the USSR were engaged in intelligence and analytical work, and some women had senior positions. For example, in the 1980s, the head of one of the KGB units was Colonel Galina Smirnova. But there were no female investigators in the KGB, according to Kryuchkov. It's too much work, he said. The average salary of women did not differ from the salary of men and was about 300 to 350 rubles. A very good pay for the time. To the question of the Soviet journalist, 1989, whether the authorities used currency prostitutes as a source of information, KGB chairman Kryuchkov answered evasively, the KGB has more reliable assistants. Well, the Soviet secret services took mostly attractive girls. Their potential was evaluated by a special commission. The beauties were trained in espionage skills, introduced to technical innovations, and given a deep knowledge of male psychology. Different paths led women to the special services, but their choice as a KGB agent was never accidental. The selection of women for undercover work was particularly careful. They were required not only to have an excellent knowledge of their business and foreign languages, but it was assumed that an officer of undercover intelligence must possess the art of reincarnation, that is, an acting talent. The most striking example of such an agent was the actress Olga Chekhova, who since 1932 lived in Germany on the personal mission from the head of the Foreign Counterintelligence Department of the Ministry of the State Security of the USSR. Chekhova managed to become the mistress of the Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring. In addition, she had numerous affairs with men from whom she received information about the plans of the Führer. Among the unwitting informants of the actress was even the propaganda minister of the Third Reich, Joseph Goebbels. Undercover intelligence agent Irina Alimova was not an actress, but according to others, she could easily become a movie star. Using her acting skills, she successfully conducted espionage work in Japan, becoming a worthy successor to Richard Sorge. Richard Sorge, considered to be one of the most accomplished spies in the world. He was a German journalist and a Soviet military intelligence officer who was active before and during World War II and worked undercover as a German journalist in both Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. His code name was Ramzai. Some very smart people on this planet believe he was the ultimate spy. So the whole of Japan saw the picture where Alimova was captured with the wife of the emperor of the land of the rising sun. Probably the better word to say is depicted on that picture. Bibiyan Alimova. For simplicity, she was called Irene. She was born in the Turkmen city of Mari in June of 1918. Alimova went to the front in World War II, to the military censorship unit. That's where she served. She already knew 4 languages and worked as a translator. Now, when the war ended, she was working in Vienna. Her career then was in the special services. In 1953, she was offered to go to Japan illegally, meaning undercover, because they use different terms in the Russian language. Nelegal, but that's translated as undercover work. According to legend, she, the daughter of a rich Uyghur, and Mrs. Khatich and her fiancé Anwar Sadiq got married in China, and from there they went to Japan via Hong Kong. Sadiq returned. He turned out to be a Soviet intelligence officer, Shamil Hamzin. Looking ahead, let's say that the spies' names with the code names Bir and Halev liked each other, and although became a married couple by higher orders, they lived their whole lives together. Easily establishing contacts and avoiding suspicion, the Soviet intelligence officer received valuable information about American military bases and coastal fortifications in Japan. Well, let's talk about seduction and compromise. According to intelligence historians, it was in the USSR that one of the most powerful secret services in the world was created, which trained female spies who knew how to seduce men. Not so long ago, a book about the history of sex espionage in the USSR was published, in which in particular the testimony of a defector named Vera is given. The former agent told how the special services had to recruit pretty students, promising them all sorts of benefits and privileges in return for performing their civic duty. According to the defector, the girls tried to get rid of feelings of shyness and shame, taught the art of love, showed pornography, including with various perversions. The students were required to complete any task. You are soldiers, your weapons are your bodies, the future sex agents were told. The Soviet Secret Service even opened a special school near Kazan, which trained not only female spies but also young people of non-traditional orientation. By the time they graduated, the former students were becoming cynical and sophisticated seductresses, which was not at all consistent with the moral image of a model Soviet girl. But the motherland demanded sacrifices. Before performing the next task, the objects of attack were carefully studied, their intimate preferences were found out. The introduction was supposed to look casual and not arise suspicion, but the end was always the same: blackmail. Anyone caught on the hook was politely told that he had no choice but to cooperate with the Soviet intelligence. Night swallows, inexperienced students, were not always able to turn into experienced seductresses, so the agencies had to resort to the services of what they called priestesses of love, or prostitutes. Russian television has repeatedly broadcast information about the fact that the counterintelligence of the Soviet Union, there was this unit called Night Swallows. It was a currency prostitute who catered to foreign visitors. Vasily Kartuzov, a former colonel of the second main directorate of the KGB, confirms this fact. According to him, the night swallows are the agents of the second main directorate, which could be substituted for recruiting of other purposes. Whoever the agency was interested for. Former Secret Service agent revealed about the operation in Leningrad when a prostitute named Shevich was sent to a millionaire from the United States during an auction of her products. In the room, the American was so embarrassed that he was not able to make love. Nevertheless, in the future, the businessman and the sex agent began a relationship, and very soon Shevich left with her chosen one to the United States. Well, and what did such lonely girls have to lose? Kartuzov justified the defector. In every major Soviet hotel, the KGB equipped special rooms with wiretaps and video recordings. The hooked client was shown the recorded material and forced to cooperate. Despite the well-established network of sex agents, there were no intimate salons in the USSR. The legislation did not allow this, but in Germany it was possible. And its Soviet Secret Services opened up a special salon in Frankfurt am Main, where NATO officers came to relax and unwind. The information obtained was immediately forwarded to East Germany and then to the Soviet Union. Often contrary to expectations, incriminating materials had no effect on the person whom the KGB agents wanted to recruit. This happened during one of the visits to the USSR of the Indonesian president Ahmed Sukarno, known for his love of games and bed. A group of young seductresses was sent to the president, who first met them under the guise They first met him under the guise of Aeroflot flight attendants. The enthusiastic Sukarno invited the girls to the hotel and arranged a grand orgy there. Everything was filmed in all angles, on the best American film at the time. Everything went like clockwork, but when Sukarno was shown a porn film with his participation, he unexpectedly took it as a gift from the Soviet government and asked to make several more copies of the film. The operation failed. In 1979, by the order of the head of the KGB Yuri Andropov, in the USSR, there were regulations for the mechanism of listening in on conversations. Listening points were installed everywhere, including in embassies, to intercept the negotiations of foreign diplomats. The operators at the listening points were mostly women. They recorded the conversations on tape and took shorthand notes. Not every employee could cope with such a task because each operator had to be able to recognize up to 50 different voices. By the time of the collapse of the USSR, about 900 such operators worked in Moscow and about 400 in Leningrad. Now let's talk about some interesting cases. When British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher received the sculptor Galina Fedorova in London, she did not suspect that she was facing a Soviet intelligence officer. The Iron Lady was kind and thanked Kosovo for the bust with her image, which was placed on the desktop. Yelena, the daughter of a general who commanded the Interior Ministry internal troops, was the first Soviet woman to work for the United Nations. After school, she enrolled in a 2-year foreign language course at the Higher School of the Moscow State Security Service, where she met her future husband, intelligence officer and journalist Nikolai Kosov. In 1949, Senior Lieutenant Kosova and her husband went on a business trip to the United States. Yelena received the operational nickname Anna, became a translator in the USSR mission to the United Nations. Then she got a solid position in the headquarters of the United Nations. According to legend, Yelena was a specialist in the protection of women's rights, which helped a lot in her work. My informants were usually women. Communication between the two ladies, their random meetings in the cafeteria, the barber shop, no one is suspicious. One handshake, a friendly hug, and she got the code. Thanks to this connection, the Soviet Center regularly received information on the position of NATO countries on global world problems. In New York, she was a contact in Barkovsky group. He was just working on the atomic bomb case. Kosovo recalled of her work. One day, Yelena had to rush on a residence, well, that's undercover agent's assignment, to another state in the United States and rescue an undercover agent who was on the verge of failure. The American counterintelligence failed to capture the Soviet agent as the result. Most of the episodes of her work are still classified. Few people knew that Yelena Kosova, a member of the Unions of Artists of Hungary and the USSR, was the so-called nuclear espionage intelligence officer. Her works have been exhibited in museums around the world. The daughter of the poet Vladimir Mayakovsky, American Patricia Thompson, according to the Soviet media, burst into tears when she saw the bust of her father by Kosova. Yelena also created sculptural portraits of Charles de Gaulle, John F. Kennedy, Margaret Thatcher, Maxim Gorky, Anton Chekhov, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Ludwig van Beethoven. She told Russian journalists to write the most important thing, that she found her second vocation at the age of 50, when she picked up a piece of clay. Let this be an example to all women, she said. It's never too late. She died in February of 2014 at the age of 89. Now let's talk about some other techniques. The ability to escape from professional surveillance can be called a real art. Sometimes secret agents trying to throw off the tail show wonders of ingenuity. However, most often there is a lot of work and long preparation behind this. The so-called mobile surveillance is divided into walking and vehicle surveillance. As a result, many people believe that the easiest way to get away from foot observation is to get lost in the crowd. Indeed, it is much more difficult to keep an object in sight in the confusion than it is in a deserted space or place. However, experienced agents will not lose control of a person, even in the hustle and bustle. So Leonid Shebarshin, who served many years in the KGB, in his memoirs, The Hand of Moscow, Notes of the Chief of Foreign Intelligence, wrote that it is almost impossible to get lost in the crowd and to detect surveillance in the crowd too. However, professionals are still able to calculate the pursuer when moving around the city. For example, Yuri Drozdov, who devoted 35 years of his life to serving in undercover intelligence of the USSR, in his book Comments of the Chief of Undercover Intelligence, mentioned that the Soviet intelligence officer Irina Alimova, which we talked about already. Well, Alimova, who worked in Southeast Asia, once noticed that she was being followed. The tail had to be dropped immediately, as Irina was heading for the hiding place. At one point, she hid behind a tree and then came right out to meet the person who followed her. The latter, realizing that he was discovered, retreated. Sometimes this solution is the only correct solution for secret agents. Demonstrating that the victim has noticed the surveillance is an effective method, including to surprise effect. The itinerary of an agent who wants to break away from observers should be just as unexpected and difficult. So Oleg Tsarev and his co-writer John Costello, in their book Fatal Illusions, mention the Major of State Security, Alexander Orlov, who worked illegally in Europe. Among other things, Orlov was taught to avoid surveillance by changing modes of transport. For example, during a walk, an agent who noticed the tail suddenly jumped on a bus or tram and then just as suddenly changed to a taxi. However, this method requires some preparation. Therefore, the author of the publication Development of Memory by Methods of Special Services, Denis Bukin, recommends daily training. Bukin advises people to carefully study and remember the subway map or bus routes in order to navigate these types of transport only from memory. It would be nice to know the time of the stops, for example, the intervals between them, their sequence, and so forth. Having all the above information guarantees success, since it will be easier to break away from the so-called tail if the agent plans his or her movement around the city in accordance with the schedule of public transportation. Well, then the other technique is, let's say, the agent was not successful. So how should the Soviet intelligence officer act in the event of exposure? Being exposed is the most dramatic outcome of an intelligence officer's work, but exposure does not mean complete failure. Soviet agents who worked undercover were able to adequately get out of a seemingly dead-end situation. The difficulties of the profession intelligence is not only dangerous, but it's also a thankless job. Only those agents whose activities have been revealed become famous all over the world. The undercover intelligence agents or spies who manage to do their work perfectly, they have sunk into oblivion. No one knows about them. And we'll probably never know their names. Those agents, if they share their memories, then they only do so with the permission of their superiors, or within the framework of a strict conspiracy. The training of the undercover intelligence officer was expensive for the Soviet treasury. It was about 3 to 5 million rubles, quite a lot of money by those standards. It included teaching foreign languages, psychological skills, martial arts techniques, and many other subtleties of this difficult craft. Special importance in the GRU, or the main intelligence directorate of the USSR, was attached to the work of the cover story of the undercover agent. The trained agent had to convincingly play the role of a person who either did not exist in nature at all or does not exist at the moment. The legend, as the Soviet spies said, should not be like a Chinese basket. You pull on one rod and the whole structure falls apart. If, for example, in the house of a person whose identity is assumed by the undercover agent, there was a cat, then not only this agent had to know its nickname, or cat's name, color, but also all of its habits. Mikhail Krizanovsky, a former KGB intelligence officer, recalls an incident when a couple on a train traveling between two European capitals tried to recruit him, issuing the following phrase as a compliment: "You have very accurate political forecasts. You should work in intelligence." Well, Krizanovsky decided, so my behavior was wrong, he says, too professional, which did not correspond to the legend given to him by of being an average businessman. The intelligence agent always had to remember that the whole burden of failure always fell on his shoulders. At best, he would be expelled from the country. At worst, death penalty. Exposure is the most terrible result of the work of any intelligence officer. To avoid it, there were a number of instructions, rules, and precautions. The basic rule is to avoid anything that might attract the attention of counterintelligence. This could be an income that is too high for the agent, especially from obscure sources, and too much extravagance. Life on a grand scale is a taboo. For example, Harry Houghton, an agent of the Polish and Soviet intelligence services, helped expose himself by spending the extra money he received for espionage on real estate transactions. And Oscar Vassell, a former British clerk who worked for the Soviet intelligence, spent money on expensive clothes. They were both spending more than they were earning, and sooner or later that would draw attention to them. The assistant of one of the most experienced Soviet spies, Colonel Rudolf Abel, that assistant suffered from another passion and a moderate craving for alcohol. In the end, he had to let it slip, and it did. A weakness for the females could also cost the agent a career. The instructions were clear. The agent should not be tempted by the attentions of posh ladies who sat down with him in the bar or appeared from the closets in hotels. If the spy was too fond of the beauty, he could well be recalled to Moscow. A career intelligence agent, unlike a movie hero, almost never carries weapons, disguised wiretapping and videotaping devices, encrypted messages, even sewn into the lining of his trousers. In case of detention, all this will lead to exposure. Soviet spy stations for undercover agents were small in order to minimize the consequences of failure. If the station grew, it was divided in two sections. When one of the parts was found out, the other one had to go unnoticed. Allowing for possible exposure, the agent, first of all, must take care of the safety of important, including compromising materials, documents. Selecting a hiding place is a complicated matter. Most often it was placed under a high voltage line. It was guaranteed that nothing would be built there. If the agent is in danger of failure, then he or she should be concerned about how to get away with it if possible. A spy caught without compromising evidence still had the hope of not being exposed. In case of exposure of the resident or station chief, let's say, his deputies, according to the previously developed scheme, introduced a plan for localizing the failure. First of all, it was necessary to determine which of the agents was still under threat. At high risk, communications with the agency were temporarily cut off. and those who were somehow tied to the espionage scandal left the country urgently. Sometimes more stringent measures were taken, up to the physical elimination of the vulnerable link. The golden rule for every intelligence agent who had been locked up in a prison cell is: confession eases the conscience. Non-recognition or non-recognition eases the sentence. Do not get recognized. The list of rules can be continued. Think fast, speak slowly. Distrust is the mother of safety. He talked too much. The agent terminates himself or herself when he grabs a gun. The most important quality of a spy is the ability to control himself, even in the most extreme situations. In May of 1938, a Soviet intelligence agent working in Japan, Richard Sorge, crashed on a motorcycle. The agent forced himself not to lose consciousness with an incredible effort of will. Only after passing the secret papers to the cryptographer Max Clausen, who was called to the scene of the accident, did Sorge allow himself to disconnect. Clausen had barely managed to remove the incriminating documents from Sorge's house when the Japanese police raided it. If a spy is caught red-handed, then all is not lost. The outspoken rule was: admit nothing and deny everything. Pleaded not guilty is a key phrase for any court, including the Soviet military tribunal. The writer Viktor Suvorov, who served in the military intelligence GRU, described the behavior patterns of an agent who was hooked. The main thing during the interrogation is to relax and distance himself or herself for what is happening, as if it does not concern them, as if the agent is just an observer and sees everything from the outside. In the answers, no emotions and complete uncertainty, no categorical yes or no. Instead of answering, spread your hands, shrug your shoulders, pretend to be perplexed, incomprehensible, thoughtful, but you can't admit anything. The most famous case of exposure of the Soviet station chief occurred in 1957 in June, when, as a result of the betrayal of the radio operator of undercover intelligence, Hugh Hannon, the American Special Services detained GRU agent William Fisher. Despite the sudden arrival of the FBI, Fisher maintained a remarkable composure. Having received permission to take his drawing supplies with him, the station chief first cleaned his palette with a piece of paper that contained a radio message that had not yet been deciphered. Before the eyes of the American intelligence services, the evidence was safely flushed down the toilet. The first question was, "What is your name?" The spy replied without hesitation, "Abel Rudolf Ivanovich." Fisher gave the name of his colleague. In the United States, no one else knew Abel. In Moscow, they decided that the arrested intelligence officer is unlikely to hide such nonsense as his name, which means that he will not crack. They decided to save Fisher. However, it was not until 1962 that William Fisher was returned to his homeland because of an exchange for the captive American pilot Francis Powers. According to General Yuri Drozdov, betrayal is a phenomenon that is very difficult to deal with in intelligence. He cites the example of a married couple of undercover intelligence agents, whom he conditionally calls T and G. Working flawless in one of the countries, the agents discovered that there was some kind of leak. Soon G noticed the surveillance. T, who was about to give birth, promptly destroyed the evidence and decided to act. To leave to a third country, she took her ill husband to the south for treatment, and there, together with the two children, they crossed the border of another state. Getting to the USSR was no longer difficult. Later, the traitor was also identified. It turned out to be a double agent, Oleg Gordievsky, who secretly worked for the British intelligence. Of course, he was a traitor to the Soviet Union. with the American citizen Harry Gold, who was engaged in the industrial espionage in favor of Moscow, the Soviet intelligence service stopped cooperation on its own initiative. The reason is the agent's violation of security standards, and indeed in 1946 the FBI, together with the British Special Services, established surveillance on Gold. The instructions stated that if the agent sensed danger, he should stand in a certain place with a smoking pipe. Several times Harry Gold came to the appointed place, lit a pipe, but no one met him. Detaining agents who work for foreign intelligence agencies was and still is one of the most difficult tasks. And it's not just about identifying such cadres. Spies have always been resourceful. That is why the combatants of Alpha and disguised in departmental sweatsuits, those they suspected to cooperate with the enemy. In fact, people who were arrested in Russia began to be stripped naked for a long time, for centuries. According to the author of the book Gendarmes of Russia, Vladimir Zmoig, referring to the words of the Frenchman Meselieu, the Russian diplomat Alexei Bestuzhev-Rumin, who lived in the 18th century, spent time under house arrest in the nude, which was apparently a common practice. At least Meselieu wrote about the Bestuzhev-Rumin as usual stripped naked, and they took away his razors, knives, scissors, needles, and pins. The Frenchman further recalled 4 grenadiers with fixed bayonets stood motionless by his bed, with which the curtains were open. This took place through the centuries, so it wasn't just in the Soviet times, but in the Soviet times it was a little bit different also. Soviet citizens taken under arrest and prisoners were searched in a very similar way. So the author of the book, for example, 7,000 Days in the Gulag, Karl Steiner, who spent several years in the Soviet concentration camps, said that the stripping naked was the most common method of searching convicts. Such methods were primarily due to ensuring the safety of the security officers, gendarmes before them, security guards, and other employees of the relevant structures. But the undressing of the detainees under suspicion of cooperation with the agents of the enemy special services was primarily associated with the preservation of the life of the what they call criminal himself. Igor Atamanenko, author of the publication Honey Trap, The Story of Three Betrayals, claims that in the 1970s the KGB issued an order according to which the soldiers of the Special Forces Alpha who participated in such detentions were required to strip this suspect naked and thoroughly search all the cavities in his or her body. The arrested person did not have a spare outfit, so most often he was dressed in a departmental sweatsuit. The alleged agent's clothing were confiscated. According to Atamanenko, this order was born after the death of the Soviet diplomat Alexander Ogorodnik. CIA agent Ogorodnik was arrested in June of 1977. As Igor Ansikhin writes in his book 200 Famous Poisonings, Tryanan, the code name of Alexander Ogorodnik, almost immediately agreed to cooperate. So they sat him down at the table and gave him a paper. Ogorodnik wrote to the State Security Committee KGB of the USSR, explanation: I am Ogorodnik Alexander, I admit, but he didn't have time to write anything else. After performing some manipulations with a ballpoint pen, Tryanan suddenly wheezed and slid off the chair. It turned out that Ogorodnik took his own life with the help of a small sealed vial with poison, which was in the pen. Viktor Popenko also mentions that such spy pens in his books Secret Instructions of the CIA and KGB on Collecting Facts, Conspiracy and Disinformation. However, according to Popenko, most often the sealed vials with poisoned agents sewed in the corner of the collar. With the threat of detention, it was only necessary to bite the collar in order not to fall into the hands of the enemy alive. However, experienced counterintelligence officers were aware of what tricks the arrested could pull. Also, Popenko, as well as Atamanenko, claims that the detainee was thoroughly searched and, if necessary, changed his clothes and even shoes. And this is not surprising, because the suspect was needed alive. The importance of detaining a living enemy who can reveal many secrets was noted in his memoirs, Intelligence and the Kremlin, Memoirs of a Dangerous Witness. And the famous intelligence officer, Pavel Sudoplatov, he was a saboteur. He carried out special operations all over the world. According to Sudoplatov, during the World War II, Grigory Myranovsky, the head of the toxicological laboratory of the NKVD, KGB, used certain drugs to specially euthanize Nazi intelligence Abwehr agents in order to replace seal vials with poison sewn into the collars of their clothes. Myranovsky did this so that agents arrested in the future would not be able to commit suicide, and after being detained, they would become a source of important information. So here is some of the stories that I brought to you. I'll bring you more in the future. I thank you for your support, and if you can, please support me. You can see the links in the description to this video. Thank you.